You know, the words I'm speaking right now, they have a secret history. And it's not some quiet, dusty story from a textbook. No, it's a story packed with invasions, epic monsters, and brutal power struggles that literally forged the English language. So let's peel back the layers and get into that incredible origin story. So, when we think about ancient Britain, our minds usually jump straight to the Romans, right? Togas, legions, straight roads, the whole deal. But what did they really do for the English language itself? Well, the answer is way more important than you probably think, and it totally sets the stage for everything that comes next. Okay, so before we jump into the timeline, there's this one huge idea we've got to get our heads around. Language is power. The philosopher Michel Foucault talked a lot about this, how the two are totally intertwined. To put it really simply, whoever's in charge, they're the ones who get to decide what language everybody speaks. And look, this isn't just some weird British thing, it's a human story. It's happened all over the world. Take India, for example. You can see power shifting from people who spoke Sanskrit to Persian and then to English. We're about to see that exact same pattern play out in Britain, where every new wave of conquerors leaves their linguistic footprint. All right, let's rewind the clock, way back. Before there was an England, before a single Roman sandal hit the beach, the island was this patchwork of different tribes. And yep, you guessed it, each one had its own language. So, here's how it all went down. For a long, long time, starting around 500 BC, Celtic and Gaelic-speaking tribes were the dominant groups. Then, bam, 54 BC, Julius Caesar shows up. And for the next 400 years, Latin is the language of the powerful. But then, around 450 AD, the Romans pack up and leave, and that's when things get really interesting. But here it is, the single biggest thing the Romans left behind. See, the Celtic and Gaelic languages were mostly spoken traditions. The very idea of writing things down using these letters, this alphabet, well, that's a 2,000-year-old gift from the Romans. You're literally using their technology right now. So, the Romans are gone. There's this huge power vacuum. And into that void come new invaders sailing over from mainland Europe. And they brought with them the raw ingredients, the different dialects that would eventually mix together to become the direct ancestor of modern English. This right here is where our language really begins. So who were these people? They were mainly three Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And you've got to picture this. They weren't one big, happy army. They were competing warrior groups, each with its own distinct dialect of a Germanic language. And here's the aha moment. The most dominant of these tribes, the Angles. The land they conquered started to be called Angleland. Sound familiar? Over time, that just smoothed out into England. And their dialect, which they called Anglisk, became English. It's that direct. But it's so important to remember, this wasn't like flipping a switch. There was no official English dictionary on day one. For centuries, it was just this messy, chaotic fusion of dialects from the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, all swirling around with the leftover Latin and Celtic words that were still there. It was a real linguistic melting pot. So what did this new, mashed-up language actually sound like? Well, the best way to figure that out is to look at the first stories and poems they wrote down. And what we find is a kind of poetry that feels totally alien to us now, because it played by a completely different set of rules. No rhyming. Okay, just look at this for a second. On the left, you've got the opening of the great epic poem Beowulf in its original Old English. On the right, the modern translation. It's technically the same language, just separated by 1,000 years or so. But it looks and sounds like a completely foreign tongue, doesn't it? The secret to its sound was this thing called alliterative verse. Instead of making words rhyme at the end of the line, the poets created rhythm by repeating sounds at the beginning of words. It gives it this powerful, driving beat, which they say was meant to mimic the rhythm of a human heartbeat and breathing. And the first poet we know of who was brave enough to write in this new scrappy English instead of fancy Latin was a guy named Cadman. And all this leads us to the big one, the most important work of literature to survive from this whole period. It's this massive epic poem that's basically a window straight into the soul of the Anglo-Saxon world. That poem is, of course, Beowulf. You've probably heard the name, and for good reason. It is the absolute bedrock of English literature, a story of heroes and monsters that just perfectly captured the spirit of this new culture. And when I say epic, I mean epic. It's over 3,000 lines long. It tells the story of the hero, Beowulf, who sails to Denmark to fight a terrifying monster named Grendel. And then, years later as an old king, he has to face an even deadlier dragon. But here is where it gets really fascinating. Some scholars have this amazing theory that these aren't just random monsters, they're symbols. Grendel, the monster from the swamps, represents Africa, and the dragon, hoarding gold in its lair, represents Asia. So if that's true, the very first great story in English is about a hero from Europe conquering the rest of the known world. It reveals so much about the ambition of these people. So, as we've seen, the story of English isn't really about grammar and spelling bees. It's a story of conquest, of different cultures clashing and fusing together. From the Celts and Romans to the Angles and Saxons, every single power shift is literally written into the DNA of the words we all speak today. The English language is pretty much a living, breathing record of its own wild history. It has never, ever stopped changing, and it's still absorbing words and ideas from all over the globe. So if this is the crazy story of where English came from, you have to wonder, where is it going next?